IB Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Trevor. That's my man, Bryan. And Bryan, it's Monday.
Yeah, man.
It's game week, and it is finally here. So after a long, it feels like USC was forever ago.
It does. Right? Yes.
Right? It feels like that game was forever ago. We found out the next day who Notre Dame was going to be playing in the playoffs. And now it is finally here. Game week is here. I'm excited. I know we're going to talk about it all week. We got the Irish Breakdown tailgate going on Friday before the game, which is going to be a lot of fun. But before we get to any of that, Bryan, we got a lot to talk about.
Oh, yeah. That's why we're kind of having our own little version of Monday Night Football. That's what this is, man. A little Monday Night Football.
It sure is, man. I'm excited for it. I'm ready to finally talk about this matchup in detail because I know we were putting stuff off. There was a lot to cover. There was a lot of things to talk about, but now it's finally here. Notre Dame will host Indiana this Friday night at 8 p.m. in the first ever home playoff game in college football history. Fitting that it's in South Bend, Indiana.
Yes.
What do you think, Bryan?
Oh, there's no doubt, man. There's no doubt. And obviously we have some big news we'll get into even before that. But it's kind of like, I think I've said this before, but Notre Dame should have been in the 2014 playoff, right? I mean, that's just meaning like that program is one that should have been in that inaugural playoff. And they didn't get it done. They didn't deserve a spot. So it's good to get them in on this one. But and it's not at all surprising that when you looked at the matchups that this was going to be the Friday night standalone game.
Right.
I kind of think there's a reason we all expected that to happen. And it's no better way to get it started than with a game in South Bend, right? A traditional blue blood program against a bit of an upstart team that nobody expected to be here. I mean, Notre Dame's a team that preseason a lot of people thought was going to be a playoff team. I think they're probably seated a little higher than a lot of people had them. I saw a lot of 10s and 11s in the preseason. But, Notre Dame is there, and now we get to find out just how good this football team really is for the Irish, and it's a weird time too, Trevor, because we're sitting here on December 16th. We're going to do a deep dive in Indiana because Indiana and Notre Dame. We didn't want to do it last week because then it's like, okay, well, how much of a you dive into it last week, and then what the heck are we going to talk about this week? So last week we were kind of focused on Notre Dame and who they are and where they are and what they need to do. And this week we'll dive more into specifics. Tonight we're going to kind of look at big picture, what's at stake for Notre Dame this week. We're going to talk about Indiana. We're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into Indiana and then talk about some matchups to keep an eye on. Tomorrow, we'll go live at 2 p.m. tomorrow. We're going to dive into the matchup of the Notre Dame offense against the Indiana defense. We'll do even more detail. Like, we're going to get real detailed this week, folks. Like, we're going to really dive into it and do what we do best. Wednesday, no buy, sell, hold this week. Wednesday, we will take a deep dive into the Notre Dame defense against the Indiana offense. And then Thursday, of course, we will do our keys to victory, our prediction show, and Bill Bender will join us to talk about the other 3 playoff games. So that's what we got going on, Trev. But the other weird thing about now is you also have the portal hot and heavy right now. And we didn't expect anything to break for Notre Dame before the Friday playoff game. But lo and behold, today, some news broke. Notre Dame picked up a commitment from Alabama transfer Devonte Smith. Not that Devonte Smith.
I was just about to say.
Not that Devonte Smith. Notre Dame's going to have Bryce Young and Devonte Smith on their team next year. So, yeah, it'll be pretty good. Pretty good.
I was just about to say Notre Dame's going to start recruiting a bunch of kids just with former famous college football names. That'd be fun. Just build a roster full of Bryce Youngs and Jerry Judys and Jamar Chases. But no, it's exciting. So to get things kicked off, Bryan, you mentioned it. Devonte Smith has committed to Notre Dame. That news broke a couple hours before the show. And we're going to spend the first couple minutes here talking about this commitment, what it means for the team, what it means for the outlook of 2025. It's going to help plug some holes and fill some question marks that we had going into next season, especially in the secondary. So Devonte Smith commits from Alabama. And I know, Bryan, you probably know a little bit more on the backstory of this kid and what's kind of led to this commitment.
This is an interesting one, Trev, because this is a name that just kind of recently popped up, and not a guy that really there was a lot of talk about I thought he would be a candidate, but didn't know that it would happen this quickly. Definitely didn't see him committing today coming. I'm going to be honest with you. I did not have a commitment story ready for him. But it happened quick. And the reason it happened quick is because when he got in the portal, this was their primary nickel target. As you know, Notre Dame in the last 2 years has gone to the portal for nickel. 2 years ago was Thomas Harper. This past season, it was for Jordan Clark. And then, of course, next year it'll be for Devonte Smith. I know he's listed as a cornerback. He is a nickel. That is what he played. He played what they call it the Husky position in the Alabama defense, which I think is really super lame that you gave a position, the name of the mascot of the school you just came from. You know what I mean? Like, come on, don't be that guy. But anyway, so he played the nickel position there, and there's some really interesting backstory to this, Trevor, because he's a Cincinnati native. So he is not a Southern kid. You know, he is a kid from Cincinnati, and it was obviously he went to Alabama and signed as part of the 2021 class. Out of LaSalle High School in Alabama. Played there for his freshman year, played a lot of special teams his first 2 years. Got injured last year, so he technically would have been done after this season if not for the injury. So he got hurt last year, missed almost all the season, came back really late, played in the last couple games, and then the SEC title game, played some special teams against Georgia in the SEC title game. And then, of course, was their starting nickel this year. He only had about 70-something career snaps coming into this season. And then, of course, this season for Alabama, he played over 400 snaps. But the interesting thing is when he was coming up at Cincinnati, there were 3 guys that lived in Cincinnati whose names are known to a lot of Notre Dame fans. It's Marcus Freeman, Mike Mickens, and Chad Bowden. Now, obviously, Mike Mickens left a little earlier than all those other guys, but like this was a kid they knew about from the time he was a freshman, sophomore at LaSalle in Cincinnati. And then, of course, there was already a relationship there with Coach Freeman and Coach Chad Bowden. And then, of course, he left for Notre Dame. And that was when, was Devontae's freshman year. By the time he was a senior, it was obvious they weren't going to get him because he was looking at schools like Alabama.
Sure.
There was that relationship early on where they were very familiar with this young man, tried to recruit him at Cincinnati. Obviously, that as soon as schools like Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Oregon, all those schools offered him. Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, Nebraska, Tennessee. This was a legit top 250-ish kind of kid. Recruiting rankings wise, obviously that's where he was for a lot of people. He was a 133 by On3, 154 by 247, 229 by Rivals. And was a kid that made an impact immediately as a freshman at Alabama on the special teams. Never made much of an impact on defense until this year, but played a lot on special teams. But that relationship obviously is a big part of it. And then I learned today, which is actually a big thing for him, is apparently Devonte recently had a child. So he is now a father. And a really important thing for him when he jumped in the portal wasn't that he necessarily didn't like Bama. It's that he wanted to get closer to home to be near his child. And so I thought that was, that's a pretty cool thing, wanting to be to come home and be responsible and just kind of be around his child and be a dad, which I thought was a really cool thing. So, that was an interesting part of the story as well. You know what I mean? And that helped Notre Dame. So that relationship with Marcus Freeman and that relationship with Chad Bowden and Mike Mickens certainly played a role once he jumped in the portal. And clearly this is a kid who's been doing the work he needed to do at Alabama academically, because that's why he's getting an opportunity to come to Notre Dame. So for people who don't understand, Notre Dame, from what I am told, is not making exceptions for transfers when it comes to you can be a 2-2 academic kid at another school. They want guys that are legitimate student athletes at other schools. They're just being more open to what schools they'll consider, which is why you're getting a kid from Alabama and not some of the traditional schools we've seen in the past. I mean, you saw it from Clemson this year. You saw Florida International this year, Arizona State. You're seeing more of that. But this is a kid that clearly handled the academic work just like Chris Mitchell did, just like Bo Collins did, just like Riley Leonard did, just like Jordan Clark did. And then obviously Devonte Smith has handled that as well. And so that's the backstory as far as what got him here. And that's what played a role and it's why it happened so quickly. This happened a lot quicker than we kind of anticipated happening. But from what I was told, this was the number one target. Like once he jumped in, this is who they zeroed in on at nickel. And I think the staff probably feels they're about a year away from really feeling like the roster's in a position where they can just focus entirely on high school recruits to fill that void. They still feel like with some of the depth issues at corner and safety, some of the potential nickel players there are going to be needed at corner and safety. And they felt they needed to go out and get a nickel that could come in and do what the last two kids did, which is just kind of come in and seize that spot. There'll obviously be competition. There's always competition. Rod Hurd was brought in to start at safety. You see what happened there, right? But this is a little bit different. I do expect him to kind of go into this next season as that guy. And that was the sales pitch to him, is like, this is what our need is, right? And everything else fit. So it's a good pickup. The backstory is a good pickup, right? We'll talk about the football player next.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's really exciting for me and my immediate takeaway was not only is the high school recruiting at Notre Dame through Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden and the rest of their staff being elevated, but now you're starting to see it along in the transfer portal as well. So all the dominoes are starting to fall, and Notre Dame is becoming more and more of an attractive destination for not only high school kids, but for kids who performed. I mean, down at Alabama, I mean, this kid was playing home games in Tuscaloosa 4 weeks ago. You know what I mean? So it's exciting that this caliber athlete is coming to Notre Dame, and that process went really quickly. But hearing that backstory, man, it's awesome. I mean, a young man that's willing to take care of business and do the right things outside of the world of football. And now it's all starting to fall in line with that world of football. So it's a lot of fun.
And he's going to step right into a defense that's been pretty flipping good the last couple of years too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about this. A kid's leaving Alabama to come to Notre Dame and be part of an even better defense than the one he was a part of at Alabama. I mean, think about that. I mean, if you're looking at the numbers, we're looking at the impact. I don't think it's really debatable that Notre Dame the last 2 years has had a better defense than Alabama. I mean, this year Alabama gave up 17.3 points per game. Last year they were at 19 points a game. You know, this year defensively, they're at 330 yards per play or per game, 4.9 yards per play. Last year, they're at 316, 5.0 yards per play. And then, of course, the pass defense especially has been not nearly as good as Notre Dame's. They were at 191 last year, 191 this year. They've been pretty consistently at that mark. Over 6 yards an attempt the last 2 years. Notre Dame's been well under. So he's leaving Alabama to come play for an even better defense and get an opportunity to get a master's degree from the University of Notre Dame. So pretty cool deal there for Devonte. And, of course, it's an important pickup for Notre Dame.
Yeah. It fills the need. It's fantastic. And from a football player standpoint, he's a good player, man. I mean, he had, you said it, over 400 snaps this season for Alabama, and 323 of those were from the slot corner position, the Husky, the nickel, suppose whatever you want to call it. He allowed 0 touchdowns this year. I mean, he's a good player.
So what's interesting, Trev, is all those snaps were from that position, but they would move him around a lot, because I know what you're looking at. You're looking at the Pro Football Focus data as far as where he lined up. But so if you see that, there's for those who don't look at Pro Football Focus, one of the good data things that they do, we've told y'all before, ignore their grades, look at their data collection, because their grades are bad. But they'll talk about where guys line up on the D line. Are they in the box? Are they at free safety? Are they in the slot? Are they at corner? And of his 421 snaps this year, 323 were in the slot. We know where that is. 14 of them were at free safety. 72 of them were in the box. That's all part of being that nickel where you're coming off the edge. 4 on the D line, again, just blitzing off the edge, and then 8 at corner, and 14 at free, as I said, 14 at free safety. Those 14 free safety snaps, like I'm watching the Georgia game, and essentially Georgia puts formation into the boundary. They leave him to the field, and they just roll their coverage, and he's lining up as the free safety, right? And then there's other times where like they'll do an alignment, and he's kind of out there at corner because of how the other team lined up. It was all of it that I've seen so far breaking down film was of him in that nickel position. Just they would move them all around, which is really perfect for what Notre Dame ideally wants to do with their safety, because Notre Dame had to do a lot of traveling with their nickel this year, and it would get him in trouble at times because Jordan Clark is a second level player. He's not a guy that you're going to be rolling back a lot. Well, this is a kid based on who else earns spots next year that you could, if teams are going to do some of that motion stuff that gave Notre Dame problems, they can simply roll and bring that field safety down or that boundary safety down. Allow this kid to kind of drop back, and he's got experience doing that and playing that coverage. So there's a lot of things right there that match up well, that fit what Notre Dame's going to look for and what they're going to look to do. But it's primarily a second level position, and as those numbers show, he is primarily a second level defender.
Gotcha.
And you look at a lot of things they do schematically, Trev. It's a lot of stuff that Notre Dame's going to ask him to do. They play a little bit more zone than Notre Dame does, but he does a pretty decent job in man coverage. He's really good coming downhill, playing perimeter screens, playing perimeter runs. Watched Georgia run a screen pass. He splits 2 defenders and gets downhill, gets on the football. Got beat on the first play of the game against Georgia, overplayed an outside move, and they beat him on a slant for 15 yards. Rest of the game, he basically was locked down. First drive, they threw a back shoulder pass. He was in perfect position. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. I think the guy caught it, but they called offensive pass interference because he was in great position. The guy had no room, so the guy just kind of pushes him off. He's a pretty strong kid, too. He came in at like $180. He's over 200 pounds now. You look at him, he's a pretty well-built guy. In a lot of ways, Trevor, the way he plays is a lot more like Thomas Harper than it is Jordan Clark. He's a lot more physical. He's a guy you may blitz more, used to blitz more than you did with Jordan Clark this year. I wouldn't call him more physical because I think Jordan Clark's definitely a kid that he's just stronger, I think, than what Jordan is. He's a lot bigger than what Jordan is. They didn't use him a lot to blitz off the edge, but I think he can do it. That's just not what Alabama does schematically, because Alabama did a lot of what Notre Dame did last year and the year before with Jack Kaiser. So they had Jahad Campbell would do a lot of playing in the like a rover type of look, where Devonte'd come off the field and then they'd kind of rotate in. That's what Notre Dame did with Jack Kaiser and Thomas Harper last year, and what they did with Tariq Bracy and Jack Kaiser the year before. Whereas this year, Notre Dame just went almost exclusively nickel in a lot of instances. They would play, obviously, Jaden Alsbury out there, but not nearly as much as they played Jack Kaiser in that spot last year. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Next year that could change depending on the makeup of the roster, but this is a kid that I think can do a lot of those things. But, good coverage player. They do, like I said, they do a little bit more zone at Bama. So he's got a little bit more zone, some zone drop type experience, but plenty of man experience as well. Good feet, little tight in his transitions, which is probably why he's a nickel, not playing outside corner. Just a little bit tight in his transitions, doesn't really impact him the way that he plays the nickel spot. Runs pretty well, has some twitch to him. Closing speed is very good. There's a lot of things to like. He's bigger than the last 2 nickels they had. He's a legit 5'11 and a half, 6 feet tall. He's a legit 205. You just look at him on film. He's a very defined kid. He's definitely thicker than the last 2 nickels, but he runs just as well, if not better, than the last 2 nickels. I think he's more of a Thomas Harper type of athlete. Where Jordan Clark, the thing I love about Jordan Clark this year, Jordan Clark doesn't dominate because he's a great athlete, right? He dominates because he's a really, really good football player, because he is really smart. Now, he's a good athlete, but he's really smart. And Thomas, it's not that Thomas Harper wasn't smart, but Thomas Harper was small. But Thomas could run. I mean, Thomas Harper had over a 40-inch vertical at Notre Dame's pro day. He ran in the 4.4s at Notre Dame's pro day. This kid runs more like Thomas Harper. He's just bigger, longer, and stronger than what Thomas Harper was. And so he brings a little bit something different physically to the table, which you'd expect from a guy that you got from Alabama, to be honest with you. And being in David Ballou's strength program in the last 3 years is huge for me, because if Lauren Landau left tomorrow and you were asking me who would I want to replace him, it'd be like, go hire David Ballou, right? The strength coach at Alabama, who also got his college strength career started under can't believe I'm drawing a flipping blank. At Notre Dame under Matt, goodness gracious. I can't believe
Matt Balis.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm having a senior moment tonight. Matt Balis. He was with him on his first staff. So he's coming from a great strength program. He's a worker. You don't make it through 3 years of playing for Nick Saban if you're not a worker.
Right.
In a lot of ways, there's a lot to like about this, Trev. And again, I got more film to dive into, right? So this is just basically working through parts of a couple games, and especially the first game I went to immediately is going to be the Georgia game, right? How does he stack up against Georgia?
Right.
And so far stacks up pretty well. Like I said, got beat on a slant route first play of the game. After that, he was solid, man. Looking at the numbers too, Trev, here's some interesting things too. So if you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers this past season, actually before you even look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, just look at his raw numbers. for Alabama this year. He had 30, I think it was 39. Nope, sorry. 30 tackles this season, 18 solo tackles, had 5 pass breakups, 1 forced fumble. Didn't have any interceptions this past season. If you look at his numbers like his Pro Football Focus numbers, he did give up a little bit of a higher completion percentage than what the Notre Dame Nickels have done the last 2 seasons. So I'm going to pull up these numbers. Just give me 1 second. Hold on.
I wonder if some of the numbers that he's given up in coverage is due to the fact that they run a little bit more zone than man.
Well, even then, I think when you look at it and you watch the film, there's also some no cover stuff that he'll give up, where
Gotcha.
they're just going to let you complete a little 3-yard slide route.
Sure.
And it puts some of that stuff into context. So if you compare his numbers this year to Jordan Clark, for example, so Devonte Smith this season gave up 19. This is according to Pro Football Focus. Gave up 19 completions on 29 targets. If you look at Jordan Clark, for example, Jordan Clark this year gave up only 18 completions on 32 targets. So that's obviously a lower completion percentage. And then last year, Thomas Harper gave up 26 completions on 43 targets. So obviously he gave up a higher percentage than what Jordan Clark did. But Devonte Smith gave up a 65.5% completion percentage. Last year, Thomas Harper allowed 236 yards receiving on his 26 completions. And this year, Jordan Clark, on his 18 completions, allowed 170 yards. On the 19 completions that Devonte Smith gave up, he only gave up 123 yards. And when you go break down the film, there's a lot of really short throws. And so, like, some of them are, like, I'm looking at the film like, well, okay, they could have only included that. And it's like now a little screen pass that they catch behind the line and gain 2 yards. There's a catch that he gave up on 3rd and long against, I think it was Georgia. I think it was 3rd and long, maybe it was 2nd and long against Georgia, where it's a little 2-yard outcut. Guy catches the ball and he immediately drives him out of bounds, right? 2-yard completion. So there's a lot of that. So when you look at the completions, he gave up more. He only allowed 6.5 yards per catch compared to Jordan Clark this past year, who averaged 9.4 yards per catch. And then last year, Thomas Harper allowed 9.1 yards per catch. So he's well under 2 yards below them. And then, of course, his yards per target is going to be down as well. His yards per target number is actually about what the other guy's yard per completion number was, which is in the 9s, which is a really impressive number. Actually, let me I had that backwards. His yards per completion number is what those other guys had for their yards per target number.
Gotcha.
His yards per target number was actually very low at 4.2. So you look at Jordan Clark this year, his was, let's see here, he had 32 targets. His was 5.3. So he was well over a yard below Jordan Clark. So even though Jordan Clark allowed a much lower completion percentage, this kid allowed a way lower yards per target and yards per completion number. So that's kind of what you're getting statistically. And he did not get beat for a touchdown this season. He didn't make a lot of plays on the ball. He's more of a cover guy. He had 3 pass breakups according to Pro Football Focus. The raw number, actually, that's Jordan Clark. Pro Football Focus had him down as having 2 pass breakups nationally. Like the raw stats, they had him down for 5, but he did not allow a touchdown. And I'm looking at his career. He's played 478 snaps of defense in his career, 263 covered snaps. He's never allowed a passing touchdown in his career. So, that's a season's worth, essentially, right? So 470 some snaps. Jordan Clark played 483 this season. Okay. So that's the season's worth of snaps for what the Notre Dame nickel will be, and he hasn't allowed a touchdown. Now, I wanted to point this out too, Trev. So if you look at Jordan Clark, I mentioned that they don't roll as much with him. He has 4 snaps this season playing what they'd call the free safety position, because they just never rolled him back. He's going to travel. Traveling means essentially if the guy goes in motion, you travel with him, right? With Thomas Harper, you'd see a little bit more of Notre Dame kind of rolling a little bit because Thomas played more. I mean, Thomas Harper had 29 free safety snaps the year before because he came in as a safety who played nickel, where Jordan Clark is probably more of a corner type than he is a safety type. So I think that you might even see them use him more like they used Thomas Harper 2 years ago. which either works. I think Al Golden has shown he can fit either type into his system, but that's what I see when I evaluate this young man. And of course, look, playing in the SEC means he knows the kind of athletes that you're going to be facing when you get into the postseason next year. There's no question about that, and that's something that's certainly going to bode well also for this young man.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think his experience at competition is something worth noting. I'm glad you brought it up because it's, you look to recruit high caliber athletes, and when you get somebody with the kind of experience that Devonte Smith has from Alabama this past season, especially when you go through and you look at just Alabama's schedule this year, they're playing teams like Georgia, they're playing teams like Ole Miss, they're playing teams like South Carolina. So he brings a lot of good snaps to the table. I mean, for me, it just kind of looks like they just went and got a hybrid of the two, right?
Yeah.
Like they just went and got a hybrid of Jordan Clark and Thomas Harper, who's just a little bigger. So, one thing this year that I think Notre Dame kind of lacked a little bit was setting some nickel fires if the edge pass rush isn't getting home. But I think it's just because I could see Jordan Clark's size kind of playing a factor in there, and he's just more of a coverage guy.
Yeah.
Right. But it sounds like
and really good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like the stats, that we just got done talking about are, Devonte Smith is able to drop back into coverage and handle himself there, but also bring a little bit of that Thomas Harper element to the table and rush the quarterback as well, which is going to be really exciting to watch Al Golden kind of dial some stuff up with him next year.
I mean, you talk about what they faced this year. Obviously, they played Georgia this season. They played Missouri slot receivers, Luther Burden, who's an outstanding wide receiver. I'm looking up his numbers this year to see how much he played in the slot. So, I mean, Luther Burden this year, for example, played 462 of his 571 snaps in the slot, right? I mean, so, you're talking about a guy that's had to go match, and he didn't give up a single completion in that game playing against Missouri. Devonte Smith did not. And he played, let's see here, 40 snaps against Missouri, didn't give up a single completion. He was only targeted once in that game. So, those are things you look at, Trev, and you say, guy's going to walk in here with experience playing against that. Does that mean he's going to play at that kind of level? I mean, we'll see. But, that's the kind of athlete you're getting, in my opinion. That's the kind of player you're going to get, in my opinion. And it should be noted that Luther Burden's lowest output of the season this year, according to – actually, let me look up his raw data to see if it matches that. But according to Pro Football Focus, his lowest output of the season this year was against Alabama. And he had 3 receiving yards in that game. Now, keep in mind, he did not have his starting quarterback in that game. Yeah, he had 3 catches for 3 yards in a matchup against Devonte Smith in the Alabama defense. Now, like I said, Drew Pine was the starting quarterback in that game, not Brady Cook. But, the point still stands. I mean, a week before against let's go back to Luther's stats. A week before against Auburn, he had 6 catches for 49 yards. And the week after against Oklahoma, he had 5 catches for 55 yards with Drew Pine playing quarterback. So it's not like the kid never made plays. Against Alabama and primarily matched up against Devonte Smith, 3 yards on 3 targets, or 3 catches, 6 targets. So that's a pretty good experience, pretty good background. I'm going to dive into more film. If I see some things that have some issues with, have some concerns, I'll break it down, put it on the board. But the film analysis that I've seen so far is this kid's a pretty good football player. It's a pretty good football player. I mean, I was talking with somebody before the show. If I'm grading the nickels based on what I've seen so far, if I'm grading and ranking the nickels on how I evaluate them coming into Notre Dame, it'd be Devonte Smith, Thomas Harper, Jordan Clark. They've all been good players, but somebody's got to be first, somebody's got to be last, right? It's not I'm not going Jordan Clark. He's been a heck of a player for Notre Dame. Better than I thought he was going to be completely honest with you.
Same.
But that's how I'd grade them based on the film I evaluated coming in. And Devontae's film is more impressive. And now he does have the injury he had last year, but he hasn't had any injuries from what I can tell outside of what he had last season. So that's my breakdown on Devonte Smith here before we move on to this big old huge game against Indiana coming up here on Friday night.
Yeah, I was about to say something's coming up at the end of the week. Can't really remember what it is, but you're right. No, that's a good breakdown on Devonte Smith. Excited that he's coming to South Bend, as I'm sure I've seen a lot of the reactions in the chat and reactions on Twitter and everything. Sounds like a lot of people are happy to have him. So,
well, I mean, the reality is, Trev, to a degree, some people are just going to see the transfer from Alabama and just assume he's really good.
Sure.
Which is a mistake because Notre Dame's had a much better defense than Alabama the last 2 years.
Yeah.
You got to look at the film. I mean, there's kids that Alabama's that are jumping in the portal for Alabama right now, like, oh, would you go after that guy? I'm like, nope. Nope, I wouldn't. He's not an upgrade. Not that he's not a good player. He's not an upgrade over what Notre Dame has right now. The nice thing, too, that I think is worth mentioning, because one of the concerns that Notre Dame has in this portal process is you go out and get these portal kids, and all of a sudden the kids on your current roster start getting a little shook up by this because, like, geez, I thought I was in your future plans and you're going out and getting this portal player, things like that, right? Like they want the players to be as focused as possible on the right now. And the final piece of this is not one of those moves that's going to bother anyone. Because when you look at it, there isn't that, no doubt about it, you were expected to be the next nickel guy. Carson Hobbs played a lot of nickel this year, but he's going to be competing at corner for a spot in the 2 deep at corner. And you're going to need to play at least 3 corners next year. So if Carson Hobbs is in the 2 deep next year, he's going to play a lot more than he did this year, where they just didn't think he was quite ready yet. And you look at Bronte Johnson, who is another guy that is going to battle at nickel a little bit as far as either present or future. But Bronte is going to go into the spring competing for a starting safety spot opposite of Don Schuler when Xavier Watts leaves. It's going to be him. It's going to be Luke Talich. It's going to be Kennedy Urlacher. It's going to be Jadon Blair. But Bronte's competing for that role more so than he would have been competing for nickel. And with the lack of proven depth at those 2 positions beyond the starters at corner and then behind a Don Schuler at safety, you're going to need those guys to, number one, primarily focus on those spots, battle for starting jobs and spots in the 2 deep at those spots. Because, again, they're going to play at least 3 safeties next year in the regular rotation. They're going to play at least 3 corners next year in the regular rotation. Bronte and Carson are going to be battling for those spots, if not a starting job for Bronte. So now you bring in Devonte Smith. He's probably going to be the nickel unless just somebody has a phenomenal spring and beats him out. There's always competition in Notre Dame, always. So, like I said, we all thought Rod Hurd was a no-brainer to start at safety this year as well, until we saw what a Don Schuler did in the spring, and then we thought this may not be a given.
Right.
And that's how it played out. But that's the thing, too, is this move doesn't shake up the roster at all. There's no player in the current roster like, man, like, y'all told me I was going to be starting it, that's one thing that's nice about this one, and that's why hopefully Notre Dame can keep any future leaks from getting out, because they really want this team focused on what's in front of them. You know what I mean? And so I thought that was important to note before we talk about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, appreciate the breakdown, Bryan. That's going to do it for the Devonte Smith commit. Exciting pickup from the transfer portal from Alabama. He has one year of eligibility left, right, Bryan? Okay. 1 year.
I talked about this at the beginning, Trev. He should have been done after this year because he played as a true freshman. But last year he missed all but the last 2 games because of an injury he suffered before. So last year he actually got a red shirt last year. So he got a junior year red shirt. So that's why this year, his senior year, he still has another year left. Because, like I said, he was a starter on – I think the most special team snaps he played was as a true freshman. So he earned a spot on Saban's special teams as a true freshman. And so then played the next 2 years and then got hurt. I think I have to do a little bit more research on when he got hurt, but he got hurt. Let me look real quick. I don't know if – I think he got hurt, Trev, during the 22 season and then missed most of 23 is what I think happened. But I got to do a little bit more research on that and look into that and find out if that's definitely the case. With this breaking today, I mean, I'm like looking at getting into the film and getting the backstory and all that other kind of stuff. Haven't had a chance to do that, but I think he got hurt as a freshman or as a sophomore, later in the year, and then missed the next year, I think is what happened with him. And so that's why he got the red shirt last year. But he was not originally planning on being a 5th-year guy. Gotcha. But he will have that opportunity now.
Gotcha. Good deal. Well, you guys heard it from Bryan. There's going to be more stuff that's going to come out about Devonte Smith. So make sure that you subscribe to our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So before we get transitioned over to the somewhat big game this week on Friday, be sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on any platform that you watch this podcast on.